Hi, and welcome to another episode of Inspiring Honesty. First, I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Today is a special episode of Inspiring Honesty because I will not be here for the next 2 weeks. We will have a guest host, Christopher Mouty, will be coming to join Bob, and I have no idea what the topics are going to be, but I will be in Jamaica celebrating my sister-in-law's wedding, so looking forward to that.
Awesome.
But this week, I wanted to take a moment to reflect a bit because it has now been, at least until by the time I get back, by the time we do our next Inspiring Honesty, we will have been broadcasting for a year. This will be the last episode in this, I guess,
Yeah.
chronological year.
August 12th, right?
Yep, August 12th. It is.
Yeah.
So this is kind of our happy anniversary episode, Bob.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah. Right. I remember making the note in my diary. Serious intellectual harm. August 12th. No.
Well, I'm glad I could be a part of that.
Right.
Well, and I wanted to reflect a bit on what we've done in the last years and sort of where we started, where we've come to, and where we it would like to go. I guess I can say that when the show first started, there was a decent amount of time that was spent trying to decide upon a name and a format of some sort. But frankly, you and I didn't really discuss anything about what the show was going to be like, or what
No.
we were going to
Yeah.
talk about at all, even really before the first show. Just sort of went in and like, hey, let's start talking. And
Yeah.
I I don't know. I was nervous. I was apprehensive. First time doing something like that, hosting a show and having a co-host that I barely knew. We'd messaged back and forth 3 or 4 times a
Yeah.
bit.
A bit.
Um,
Yeah. But we really got to know each other on the show, because
hmm
that first show. I mean, I had no idea myself. There was a sense of caution. I didn't know whether I was going to run into somebody who was going to be demanding and overbearing and maybe
that comes
insulting
next
or whatever.
season.
You never know, because you do run into all sorts of people. But we got to know each other, and I think if there's one thing that was an overriding theme to all of it, was that it demonstrated that your being atheist and I being theist, I don't think that it had any bearing on our ability to talk or discuss issues or deal with things. We really just kind of chatted, and there's a sense, I think, in which our theistic biases just it didn't seem to be all that relevant. Personally, that's the way I experienced it.
Yeah, and I've also really appreciated when we've had guests on the show and been able to, I guess, in a way, I guess almost double team, but at the same time approach the viewpoints the guests bring to the table with two similar but at the same time very starkly different worldviews, and to, I guess, go through these conversations in a way that I don't think would have been possible if it weren't for the fact that we had such different worldviews and life experiences. I feel
Yeah.
that the dynamic between us has brought some great value to the discussions that we've had with other people as well.
I agree. I agree, and I think particularly the strange thing was with perhaps Eric Hovind and Cy. We both, for very similar reasons, totally rejected their the bases of their argument as being truly a discussable basis, and so that I got the impression that although we would differ in how we would conclude the question, we both totally agreed that the way they were trying to resolve that question was quite bogus for both of us.
Absolutely. I think also, hey, I've really been enlightened and appreciated the last year, having some of the conversations. I have to be frank, is that this has helped me overcome a lot of my personal biases and my personal interpretations of what it is to be a person of faith, and to have sincerely held theistic belief that is also a scrutinized one, that is something that has been um, really thought about. That's one of my primary biases that I came into this with, was that there's no people out there who have really taken an objective and I guess I'm trying to come up with another word that's
Yeah.
basically
You
portrays
know,
the same thing as objective,
in
but
your defense, the truth is, unfortunately, that uh, that by and large, the majority of theists are very illogical, non-critical thinking people who are emotionally invested in a position that they don't really care to question or and if they look at anything, they only know how to research things so as to find tidbits that they would call evidence that kind of bolster their position, but nothing to really shape it or form it or give it a possible foundation. And so it really, unfortunately, is rare. And I got to tell you, I would say that I started becoming much more unconventional back in the 80s. And since that day, I have found I can have an honest conversation. Since that day, honest conversations with atheists have always been far easier than having conversations with theists. And I'm a theist, you know, so I find it very frustrating at times uh, to be identified in that category when I find that many of the people in that category, um, I don't know. It's one of the reasons why I'm not just a person who is theistic. My theism is modified radically as a result of some of these considerations. And many of these considerations, I got to tell you, are considerations I had to make by talking to people who are intelligent, like yourself, who have things to say that that count for something, and have to be incorporated into what is being understood and thought.
well, and frankly, coming into Inspiring Honesty, I was not as enthusiastic about even the name of the show as I am now. I really was partial to my Facebook page's name, Inspiring Doubt. I really thought that that encompassed it more, and I still like that name, but it's really helped me sort of tackle the concept of honesty and intellectual honesty, to have these conversations over time, because what's manifested is more, I guess, of a refinement in my own mind of what it is I truly object to. And it's not just that you believe there's a God. It's the the process that you just mentioned, the way that most theists approach that, where even if they were to scrutinize it, they would look for evidence that supports them instead of for evidence that contradicts them, and see where they can go from there. It's the method of approach, the inherent censorship of uh, dissent, that it's really such a,
It's yeah,
or
it's a
even
rejection
not
of
even
the
just,
concept of the unity of truth, truth as a unity. That is, if anything is true, then it is true uh, in light of and alongside of anything else that is also true. And so therefore it's just not possible that anything that is true can be of harm to anything else that is true. But certainly an idea can be distorted by a lack of knowledge. And so therefore to learn things that are also true will force us to sometimes remodify the model that we possess in making sense of things. And so but to me, I think that a big part of it was that even when I became a fundamentalist back in the 70s. Even then I did have a concept. I just didn't really, I hadn't thought through that fundamentalism yet, enough to reject it the way I eventually did. But even when going into it, I had this concept that truth is a unity. You know what I'm saying? That there's no such thing as a truth that trumps another truth. Period. That just doesn't happen.
You're absolutely right. Actually, this makes me think of Pope John Paul II with his statement that he put out through the Pontifical Academy of the Sciences after looking into or having them examine at
Mhm.
length the theory of evolution. And it's, I mean, without any, I guess, divine authoritative sense, there was not a doctrine of infallibility being associated with this statement, but he put out a statement that said truth cannot contradict truth, and the theory of evolution is truth. But obviously, he also believes that the Catholic understanding of God is truth, and therefore
Mhm.
sees no inherent contradiction. As a matter of fact, he sees that as a logically impossible state. They cannot contradict one
Uh,
another. And
yeah, and even the science is always moving forward. The theories used to explain the facts that we're struggling with will go through modification. They will. That's just the nature of the game. But it is good enough that even for now they are genuinely coherent and consistent with the facts that we're struggling with. And to me, that is something that has to be respected, even as we accept, as scientists do, that our understanding of this is going to be enlarged and expanded upon, and in various ways modified as we come to understand more and more in a fine tuning of these issues. So, I was glad to hear that, because the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church for years have had a very solid resistance to anything academic that challenges its traditions. To a point that is, in my opinion, lacks any kind of honesty or integrity. When it takes the Protestant and the Catholic Church 150 years to admit that Copernicus was onto something, I mean, you know, just do the math. It's there, and but to disregard it simply because it says something contrary to our interpretation is just, I don't know. It lacks integrity. It really does.
I just read a blog. I'd posted it on my page here. I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. Just yesterday, that was from a woman who basically was saying a lot of people are saying, why are young people, why are millennials specifically, the
Yes.
generation that I hate the name for it, but that I belong to, I guess. Um,
Uh,
why are we leaving the church? And it says
yeah.
that it, basically that the church is that the way we see the world is changing
Mhm.
culturally and individually. We're especially the children growing up now when we use Google like a verb as one of the things that she says in there.
It's Rachel
It's
Held Evans. She is awesome. She's an
mm-hmm.
amazing young lady, and she has had a lot of things to say that I think have perked the ears of a great number of people. And she's making quite a name for herself. She's been on The View, she's been on CNN, and she's really just a blogger. She's just trying to talk. She's just trying to share her thoughts that are very, very awesome and coherent with the world. And yeah, I've been a friend of hers on Facebook for, I don't know, about 3 years or so here, and always been impressed with a great deal of her blogging. It's just impressive. She's
Yeah,
great.
I would like to learn more about her because I loved some things she said. I mean, she says we want an end to the culture wars. We want a truce between science and faith. We want to be known for what we stand for, not what we stand against. We want to
Right.
ask questions that don't have predetermined answers. We want churches that emphasize an allegiance to the kingdom of God over an allegiance to a single political party or single nation. We want our LGBT friends to feel truly welcome. I mean, these are
Hmm.
absolutely, if we look at them from the opposite perspective of what she's criticizing, these are just damning criticisms from the cultural perspective that we have now. Is to say like that's not what churches have, and we have to look at that and go, that's absurd. Why
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
churches have that?
I'm actually
This
going to be
is why
talking about
churches are
some of
harmful.
that on my program that comes on next. Not to, I don't want to take too much time to kind of promote that, but I want to talk about the biblical perspective, where it came from, and in some ways, um, defended as anthropologically naive and ancient, but it unfortunately it hasn't moved, you know. But anyhow, yeah, and it's true because we have become not just irrelevant but evil, uh, counterproductive. Um, uh, uh, it's hard to find words to describe it, but there are people who are being abused by this tradition. So, it's just something's got to change. And the younger generation, they've had it up to here. They're not going to participate in that. Um, uh, in some ways, I'm not a Democrat, but you know, in some ways, that people have been saying that the Republican Party doesn't realize it's cutting its future off by not rethinking with its values the way it applies them, and it's losing people because there's people who find it increasingly untenable.
I you're preaching to the choir on that one, but um, I have to say though that there's even more to this overall question that I think it comes out as we go on that even is some of the ways that new churches or some of the more reformed churches are changing still doesn't meet adequately what people want because even
Correct.
this article she doesn't talk about things like we want to be able to she does say we like to have questions without predetermined answers, but she doesn't say that we want to be able to have our identity as a Christian not necessarily be a divisive part of who we are. We want to be able to have friends that are, and we want it to be okay for our children to have friends that are from Hindu families and atheist families and Muslim families, and to not have that be a contention because we're not concerned about the questions that their friends might ask them and how that might damage their faith. And I think that that's implied in a lot of ways in there, but it's explicit
It'll
with
be
what we
difficult
do here.
because some of the tenets that are maintained force a certain division. I mean, think about it. If a person happens to have the kind of a faith where they believe in a hell, where they believe that there are people going to hell and people going to heaven, and that this difference is made, there's a sense in which it is unethical to both believe that and not work toward countering the perspective of people that is going to be taking them to hell. Um, but that creates some of the. I really see Christianity as having a future by becoming something a little more like Buddhism, where it is a belief system that one finds as a useful tool in the living of life, but not one where the eternal consequences are just totally dependent upon it, if you know what I'm saying. Um, that will have to be in some way disarmed before Christianity can truly become non-divisive. I mean, think about it.
I think that you're right. I think that the inherent judgmentality of and the fear of hell are parts of these religions.
Yeah.
The fear that if you don't at least push it with some sort of authority, then you're actually risking your children. I think it was actually Penn Jillette made a statement similar to that, where he doesn't respect
Yes, right. I
the
remember hearing that. Yeah. Yes.
yeah
He
the
re-
Christians who aren't really evangelical is where he says he doesn't really respect it, because if you do believe that there is a hell, and you do believe that not believing in Jesus is
that,
the ticket to get there, you damn
it
well
makes you
better be out trying to save people. That's
it's sociopathic when you stop to think about it. One of the biggest things that identify a sociopath is that a sociopath understands things clearly. They just don't care. A sociopath understands the way they manipulate people, and a sociopath understands the emotional triggers they're playing with. They just don't care. And to have that faith and to be able to just kind of sit back and keep the peace is is sociopathic. It's it's horrific. It is so neglectful. It is by its own definition quite evil. So when I saw that by Penn Jillette, it is right. That's its name.
Hmm.
I totally had to agree with him. And of course, although I'm a believer, I'm theistic. I don't have that kind of a faith. I don't see that. I see that as just um, total crap.
Now,
It's just be like, you're a biologist. Well, what if you had instead gone to school and decided that you were going to become a physicist?
that was actually my
Oh,
original
okay.
track.
Well, now you go to hell because you're supposed to be a biologist. I mean, come
Yeah.
on. What that is so arbitrary.
I, you know, I guess I wanted to move on a little bit from this because there is a bit more I wanted to talk about with
Sure.
the scope that this show has covered, and that I'd like to cover more on as well. We've had a few guests that have been um, controversial, a few guests that have not been. I'd like to have more guests in the next year and have more conversations, bringing people together, and having conversations about things that are not necessarily regularly talked about or part of the general discourse, particularly in the format where we have multiple viewpoints and multiple perspectives. Sometimes these things get brought up, but only within the echo chambers that are either for or against them. And it's really
Right.
interesting
Right. Yeah.
to have congenial conversations and pleasant conversations with people who can disagree. And I think
Mhm.
that we've had some remarkable success in doing that with not having people that are at each other's throats. So I'd like to
Right.
bring more guests into here
I
and
think yes, and
to
I think we've seen, particularly with our hangouts, sometimes we've actually seen where it's a false division to think, well, over here we have the theistic point of view, and over here we have the atheistic point of view. No, we had a multiplicity of points of view where people saw some things differently, contributed to the conversation, and it didn't really divide necessarily along those lines.
that's very true. But I do have to say that I think that we, as an organization, have a bit of a selection bias that's unintentional. But those who are drawn to the message that we spread are not
Who do you think
necessarily
is
the
drawn to our
same.
message?
Oh, I didn't catch that. My
Who is it that you see as drawn to the conversation we have that goes on? I'm curious.
um, yeah, I don't know if I could necessarily create a category, but people who one are turned off by the negativity and the vitriol that's out there. We do attract some people who want to argue with us and to disprove us, but I think that even those people very frequently are sort of disarmed by the way that we like we don't yes we will discuss things and make very strong points, but never would I
Mhm.
even consider or imagine seeing anybody else that hosts a show on here turn to ad hominems, well, unless it's
Right.
on Clash Course
Yeah.
between me and Joey, or
Yeah.
um
Alan Darley is an example of that. When Alan is a very, very, very traditionalistic. When he first got involved in dialogue with Dr. Jones and myself, um, I got the impression he was anticipating some real difficulty, and when he didn't get it, I think that he really appreciated that, and he certainly, he has his own show, and he definitely presents an extremely traditional point of view with it that I wouldn't agree with, but he discovered that well, fine, let's talk, let's put this out there, and let's also face the objections that are going to be raised. But so I think there's an example of that thing there, and I see our audience, particularly of our show, being a combination of people of faith who've had it up to here with stupidity and faith, and 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 atheists who are curious to see if a conversation can really take place in a way that all too often has failed. And I think that both the theist and the atheist of that sort have found it meaningful to to watch and participate.
I will also say that the experience that we've had doing Inspiring Honesty over the last year has really um, opened up my eyes to see that not only was I prejudicial on the theist side, looking at theists as all people who had not who, if they held these beliefs, they had not sincerely scrutinized them with as much objectivity as possible. But I also had some pretty stark prejudices about where atheists come from, and frankly, I gave us way too much credit. I projected
Don't
a
we all
lot
do
of
that? Don't we all do that?
myself.
I think we all do that. You know, we take our group, and our in group, and we think, these losers out there that don't belong to our group, they just don't get it, and I think that's a tendency for all people, which is one reason why I think it's wonderful what's going on here I like what we're doing at New Covenant Group because we're trying to maintain dialogue based upon the honesty of dialogue, not based upon what category of opinion we bring to that dialogue. And not an easy thing to do, but we really want to do it, and we really want to get people involved. I'm hoping that we can even expand that wider in the year to come.
I agree. Joey, however, just informed me, and I'm sorry to say, I won't be back because I have just admitted that I'm racist, so they're gonna have to let me go.
No, no.
Um, there is, I guess, one other aspect of things that I'd like to delve a little bit deeper into, and that it comes a little bit from the show that we did last week and previous shows, where we've talked a lot about the value of honesty in some ways where it may even be uncomfortable. And
Mhm,
last week was a great example of that for me.
mhm.
Last week we were talking about polyamory, and I came to the conclusion that it would be best to share my personal experience in that. And I had, of course, in the previously said I would not have an issue with my wife. As a matter of fact, even think it might be good for our relationship. My wife did have a boyfriend outside of our marriage, but um, I I chose to share my personal struggles with my feelings in the past, and I did that for a reason well beyond just trying to win this argument. I don't
Mhm.
think that that was the case, but because it was valuable, I believe, to share something like that, and the side of, I mean, objectively speaking, if we look at the relationship my wife and I had and the overall scope from a cultural perspective, I my wife was the victim in every way. And it was, a mea culpa on my end. I hurt her severely by not being able to control my emotions very well. Again,
Mhm.
it was an emotional affair. I developed these feelings for a friend, um, and I wanted to act on them, and I then realized it was time that I needed to say something to my wife. And the reason I think that that was valuable is because often in our culture, that becomes the end of the story, and
Right.
there's no more talking about the position that I was in, or that side of it. And I promise you, and I guarantee you from all kinds of the evidence all over the world, that I'm not the only person who's been
Oh,
in
no,
that
not at all.
situation.
There's a lot of people who have been exactly where you were. A lot of people who are there now, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of people they can talk to. Without going into detail, there was a time when I was pastor of a church where there was a problem that was troubling, to several of the women in the church as they had spoken to me, but they were each so disappointed and full of shame about it. I could not get these women to share this with each other. And for reasons of ethics, I didn't feel it would have been right for me to say, well, Mary Lou, Susan over here is telling me the same
Right.
story. I couldn't say that. I couldn't do that. But I just try to encourage them to reach out to each other and to, bare their souls to each other. And I couldn't get them to do it. They were so, and to me, they could have been a tremendous strength to each other. They looked to me as a pastor because in some ways I was an authority figure, but the truth is I think they needed each other more than they needed me. And so, whenever people are in a situation that is difficult to talk about, awkward to talk about, maybe even unacceptable, as it were, to talk about, so yeah, I do think there's value in that. Um, we could talk more about that later, but I I would hope that there are ways that you might find your views modified and changed. But wonderful that you brought that out in the open.
Well, I guess that's what I meant when I said that I'd like to focus on things like that as well with inspiring honesty, that things that are uncomfortable for us to talk about
Mhm.
because they seem, I mean, traditionally, or they, even in my own mind, I was an asshole. I was labeled the bad guy, and that made it more difficult for me. And I'm sure that there's plenty of other people that have been in these situations, and I can tell you that what helped, the reason that I'm still married and that I didn't ruin my marriage in this, is that I owned up to it, and
Mhm.
I made the decision to be honest and to talk about it, and I realized that I talked about it with my wife, and that was a very, very difficult thing for me to do, but at the same time I did that basically in a vacuum. I had no idea that any of my other friends or family or anybody had ever even been in a situation, because it's the kind of things that we don't talk about
Talk
in
about,
polite
right?
society. And therefore, it makes them scarier. It makes them taboos that are unapproachable. And in my mind, even, I had no idea
You know,
how common this kind of thing
this
is. And
yeah, this is one of the reasons why judgmentalism is so um, counterproductive. Uh, Even when people are doing something that is wrong, when we begin to attack them for having done something that is wrong, or when we begin to belittle them for having been so foolish as to have done something wrong, what we do is we create a situation where this person now is involved in some sort of an interpersonal struggle to kind of regain their dignity, um, because of the way they're being judged. And I would contend that is a complete waste of time. This is a person who, if they're doing something wrong, they need to be more honestly looking at, well, what did I do wrong? What would be the right thing to do? How should I do this differently? What is a better way of looking at this? And if they're busy trying to survive the social environment, they're not working on the things that need to be worked on. And so that's where judgmentalism is really counterproductive. It distracts a person. I've often said shame is irresponsible, because the truth is real guilt is where you own your behavior and acknowledge the fact that your behavior possessed certain outcomes that were not good. That's it. That's the end of it. If you can deal with that and then begin to reassess what you're going to do, it's the insight you're going to gain from that that's going to allow you to change, to make a difference in how you behave. But if you're dealing with shame, your shame has more to do with, oh, what a jerk I must be. And the more that this becomes your identity, I'll tell you this, it's not possible for a person who believes they're a jerk to really change, because you're a jerk. It's just what you are. And so these taboo subjects, although they can be awkward and difficult, I think that we need to look at them in a way where we're seeking to learn from them, instead of seeking. And let's face it, we live in a world where where competition can be so unethical that the moment I discover I have a neighbor who socially is involved in something where I can put them down, where I can move forward ahead, hey, let's level them, let's knock them down, let's eliminate them from the competition by virtue of what it is they've done. You know, to me, that in and of itself is also unethical.
Yeah, that I think really is a big part of it as well. I mean, the fear of the reaction that you're not just going to get, and that's the reason that I was silent about it or kept it within my own relationship as
Hmm.
well, outside of it. And there's you don't know how it's going to react or how people are going to react to that. I mean, it's been a struggle with friendships and things, and not even everybody within my friends and family knows what happened. But I can tell you this: my brother had some serious marital issues as well. Him and his wife were almost filed for divorce, had the papers and everything. And my wife went out to dinner with his wife and told her about what we had gone through, and she
Wow.
had no idea. And she talked to her about it in a very frank and open manner, and that dinner saved their marriage. My brother and his
Wow.
wife are
Wow.
happy together
Uh-huh.
now,
Yeah.
because it helped to put things into perspective for them, and for them to recognize that they're not the only people that have problems, and that some of their problems were founded on things that were much smaller and less difficult to get over than what had happened in our relationship. And it made it in their mind, I guess, a, a it made them recognize that their marriage is not ready to be thrown away. And it's been all the difference. So once again, the value of sharing our own personal experiences, even if they're uncomfortable to talk about, is something that we can't even necessarily know what it will be or what it could be unless we do it.
All right.
It's
Great.
it's
I
just an
totally.
amazing thing. And I mean, we've talked about this on a few other subjects in the past as well. And it's not necessarily always the same degree of helpfulness, but it is certainly a degree of understanding that it helps to bring, which in a way reduces the judgmentality. And I couldn't agree with you more that judgmentality is not only unproductive, it's often counterproductive. I would say that the fear of the judgment of who I am for having these feelings, and not even so much what it would do to my relationship, but because I was ashamed of what I was going through, was what I didn't want to talk about even with my wife. I thought I could overcome it myself, that it was just is something that was going to go away, and it grew with time. And I, the longer I kept it a secret, the harder it became for me to talk about it, because it had gotten even more out of proportion. And in the end, I think that the taboo and the fear of judgment of, once again, me as a person, who I am, was far more of a factor in that than we even recognize generally. If it hadn't been for the fact that I was afraid talking about the feelings I was having was going to somehow make my wife see me as less of a person, uh,
Hmm.
I would have done it a lot earlier. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
felt the need to hide that. And
I've
frankly, the
often
openness and the honesty that we have has been amazing for us now. That
I've often
there's no
argued
secrets.
that our behavior, all of us, our behavior is the result of a combination of who we are as an entity, um, but guided by the experiences we have had, which includes the experiences we have not had, the opinions and perspectives that are based upon that. And I argue very strongly that that experience is not us. That's just our experience. And if we had had a completely different experience, we would have a completely different perspective. Consequently, I also argue that our perspective is not us. It is simply a tool we are using with which to navigate the reality we find ourselves in. and therefore consequently, this is one reason why I think that identifying too strongly with our behavior in terms of identity is really a false and unhealthy notion. We are prisoners to our experience, and that is something we cannot uh, escape. We can instead, though, try to approach the experience we are thrown at in life with wiser approaches. And I think the more we can disconnect our sense of we have to own our history as certainly our history, but we don't have to necessarily own it as our self, and I think that there's sometimes we're just going to be far healthier people when we have an identity more that's associated with the blank slate that we are as persons, filled with these things that we can therefore it makes it a lot easier to let go of perspective and realize it's not you.
I don't know if I can entirely even understand where you're coming from with that one, because it's such a difficult thing to separate myself from my perception.
Right. Yeah. I think
To
that's true of most people. And I've been practicing that for a number of years. So the first time that I even suggested it to somebody else was get that what you know and in fact some people I've had to say it to them like 16, 17, 8, 20, 100 times before they finally say, I see where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I can understand their perspective there, because I'm a
Yeah.
little bit lost with that concept, to be honest.
I actually developed it somewhat as the result of studying some, rational emotive behavioral therapy. Just studying that concept as part of my human development education, and to me, it rang so true and it had a huge impact on me. It allowed me to step out of my own past in ways I needed to. Made me a very different person.